Greetings all, this is Hairy Nick. How's everyone going? Welcome back to the Hangar Bay, the weekly show where we talk about your submitted X-Wing lists. Now just a few points of housekeeping before we dive into this. Yes, this is going to be the last day that I record here in this particular office space. I'm moving house over the next few days. And as a result of that, I'm going to be quite busy. So at this stage, I'm planning for the next video on the channel to be next week's Hangar Bay. I'm giving myself about a week. FFG might put out a new article during the week, and I'll try my best to get to that, but I can't make any promises at this stage. Knowing my luck, they'll announce Wave 4 or something. We'll see what happens with that. Also, one more point. I recorded during the week the review of the points changes with Justin, and in that video, the audio was quite reverberating, very sort of big, deep and booming. I did my best to try and fix that in post. That's simply because this room is now empty and now there's a massive echo in here. Sorry, I didn't pick that up when I was recording. I've turned this mic down as much as I can, so hopefully that'll mitigate that. But apologies if that happens again. It's something that's quite difficult to avoid just at this stage while we get everything moved. And with all that out of the way, let's talk about what we're doing this week. We're back to the Rebellion, and we're going to take a look at an iconic ship. We're going to talk about the Y-Wing today. I put the question to the patrons, and they mentioned, hey, this is sort of the one iconic ship you haven't talked about, sort of barring the Falcon on a couple of factions. And I thought, yeah, this is very, very interesting. And more to the point, due to the point changes, this is looking very, very good. We had a points deduction across the board on the Rebel faction. Even on the Scum faction, we only had a point increase, 2 points on Cavill, 1 point on Ravenhull, or the other way around, I forget which one it is. But the main factors on the Y-Wing is the fact that the cost of all the turrets and the veteran turret gunner have also been reduced. So even on the Scum faction, despite the fact they've gone up in points, these pilots are pretty much always going to be taking veteran turret gunner and dorsal turret as a minimum. So they're still better off after the points changes, even though the pilots have gone up. On the Rebel faction, it's looking even better than that. So a point reduction across the board and a point reduction on basically every piece of tech they take, apart from proton torpedoes, but I think where the points are sitting right now, proton torpedoes is not really that desirable on Y-Wings. I think when you look at things like the dorsal turret and veteran turret gunner, that sort of becomes secondary. Indeed, it is worth pointing out that veteran turret gunner and every other gunner with the after a regular attack, you get to shoot with a turret type effect. They only work off primary attack. So from that point of view, I think the Y-Wing has firmly moved away from wanting to take proton torpedoes. But it has a great home right now with taking turrets and gunners, and I think that's very, very competitive. Indeed, FFG put effects like veteran turret gunner, Han, Bistan, Ezra, all those gunners that give you 2 shots into the game, and they don't really seem to have made a big splash. And now that they're being reduced in points, and the Y-Wing being probably one of, if not the best platform for this, because it permanently has a forward-facing arc, being able to then fire out the turret, which you can manually point in any direction, is very powerful. It's arguably better than the bow tie arc, which is the arc that points in one direction and the exact opposite direction, like you get on the YT 1300, 2400, the Decimator, the K-Wing, all that kind of stuff. And I think FFG were a bit conservative with that going forward. They wanted to make sure that turrets weren't going to take over the meta like they did in first edition. Having to manually aim the turret is somewhat new ground, especially on all these different platforms. So I think they made the right call with being conservative for the time being. But with the points change, we can look at seriously getting value out of these and all the other turreted ships. And I think that's going to be very interesting. Hopefully we can see a little bit of meta play from at least some turreted ships without them taking over. Just looking generally at the stats of the Y-Wing, it has the slots turret, torpedo, astromech, modification, bomb, and gunner. Which is interesting because due to the points changes, it's now only a point more than the base buy-in for the TIE Aggressor. And I had the comment after those points change videos that, hey, FFG may have forgotten the TIE Aggressor. And I think generally looking at the stats, I do actually have to agree. The TIE Aggressor doesn't look like it's in a great spot right now. 4 hull, 1 shield, 2 agility. Doesn't really have the upgrade bar that the Y-Wing has, and it's a bit of a shame because the TIE Aggressor never really saw all that much meta play in first edition, Stone Cold Zero in second edition. So I think at the next points change, it'd be good to have a look at the TIE Aggressor. What the Y-Wing has to offer is that torpedo slot. Having an astromech's fantastic. There's some great utility there, as we're going to see in these lists. And just a generally beefy chassis. The fact that it only has 1 agility is troubling, but now with this reduced buy-in, you can put a lot of stats on the table and sort of negate that low agility. If you have enough hull and health to shoot through, well, it doesn't matter how low your agility is, your opponent has a lot of work in front of them. Okay, with all that aside, let's dive into these lists. Now, I'm going to do this a little bit differently this time. We're going to start off these lists with a few dedicated only Y-Wing builds and take a look at what you can do at the various amounts of Y-Wings on the table. And I'm going to start off with this 5-of build by Samuel Janes. Thank you for submitting this on the YouTube channel. Grey Squadron Bomber, 5-of, all of them with ion cannon turret and all but one of them with veteran turret gunner. We don't have the points to put a veteran turret gunner on all of them. Now, you could think about putting dorsal turrets on all of them, and that way you could afford the veteran turret gunner on all of them with some points to spare, actually. You'd have about, 5, 6 points, something like that. Then you could think about a couple of bombs, but I don't think that's necessarily correct. Only one less veteran turret gunner doesn't feel too bad, just so long as when you're playing with this, you don't lose track of which one that is, because if you forget which one it is, and you need that double shot, it's not going to feel great. But as long as you track that, that sounds okay. And I do like 5 ion cannon turrets. That's going to be very annoying. If you can manufacture ways where you walk your opponent's ship off the table, that is very, very frustrating, especially with large base ships. I feel like this actually fares quite well against them. But more to the point, the raw amount of tax is what we're really looking at here. The fact that you can attack 7 times in one turn, if you had dorsals, it could be 8. And that just seems like a good thought. I actually want to get some feedback from you guys. What do you think is categorically better? One ship with a 3 red dice primary, or something like a Y-Wing or a TIE Aggressor with a 2 red dice primary plus a second attack with the dorsal turret? What do you think is categorically better? Bearing in mind that the 3 red dice primary can become a 4 red dice primary if you're in range 1. Also bearing in mind with veteran turret gunner, you have to line up the shots perfectly. So you're not guaranteed to shoot twice every turn, but there is more upside if you do, especially at range 1. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because I think that's the key what's going on here. If we're gonna just spam these out, there needs to be real efficiency on the table. Also, how do we counter this? 5 Y-Wings is 40 hit points on the table. That's really, really annoying. Do we have to rely on things like even the point change red line to just really delete these off the board as fast as possible? Do we need brawlers like Boba Fett? Although I wouldn't feel too confident running Boba Fett into these guys. Don't know. It's very, very interesting. Let's move on to this next list because we have 4 Y-Wings, and this time, instead of having the 5th Y-Wing, we've stacked up the points on each of these. This is YYY Ion Death by Trooper 1023. Also, Trooper, thank you for joining in the Patreon Discord. Really appreciate that. Always happy for the support. What we have this time is 4 Gold Squadron veterans. All of them have trick shot, ion torpedoes, ion cannon turret, R4 astromech, and 2 of them have veteran turret gunner, 2 of them don't. And I find this interesting. Again, I think there's some flexibility we have here. I'm not too impressed by having torpedoes on this because they don't work with the double tapping of the turret. In fact, if you cut away all of those ion torpedoes, you could have veteran turret gunners on all of them, plus seismic charges on all of them. Because you're cutting away 24 points, and that's very interesting to me. I think adding seismic charges really does help answer a lot of things that are going on. You have another tool to use against aces, if mining guild ties, tie swarms in general, vulture droids in a couple months' time when they come out. Feels like that's a good thing to have answers against, and even against lists that don't really worry about that kind of stuff, it's still, 6 seismic charges on the table they've got to deal with? That feels pretty decent to me. Also, I really dig the inclusion of R4 astromech apart from anything else. Being able to decrease the difficulty of those maneuvers means you get a blue turn maneuver, which is so important, especially when we have turrets. You need to make sure you can turn those as frequently as possible. You can do hard turns, K turns and hard turns, clear your stress and get your actions. You must have as many actions as possible to make sure you have the most likelihood of getting these off. Also, trick shot's awesome. We mentioned during the points change that we don't think that a 1 point increase is going to stop this from seeing play. I completely agree. I think trick shot on this list, particularly with a turreted ship, blah, 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 is still really, really good. So yeah, just as a general value card, I still think 2 points across the board is absolutely excellent with this card. So yeah, keep running trick shot, guys. It's still awesome. Let's move over to this next list, Why Not by Ravenhull, and again, reducing the amount of Y-Wings by 1 and increasing the power on them. We have more upgrades and named pilots this time. Norra, Wexley, Dutch Vander, and Horton Salm, and these are not symmetrical builds for the most part. They all have expert handling, dorsal turret, and R4 astromech. Norra Wexley also has advanced proton torpedoes, shield upgrade, proton bombs, and veteran turret gunner. Horton Salm has proton torpedoes, shield upgrade, proton bombs, and veteran turret gunner. And Horton Salm has ion torpedoes, proton bombs, and veteran turret gunner. Okay, so they also all have proton bombs and veteran turret gunner, but the modification and the torpedo have changed between them. And I'm not too sure about the 3 of list. This is sort of where I start to think I don't know if we're really getting the value. You've got to appreciate the fact that oftentimes, especially in 2nd edition, just having more ships on the table is quite an important thing. We don't have any sort of crazy combos with pilot abilities anymore. Especially when I look at the fact that you've got 2 shield upgrades here, I do think to myself, I don't love shield upgrade as a way of just filling out points. I mean, sure, you sort of may as well have them. If you don't take them, you have an 8-point bid, which is not irrelevant with Norra Wexley at Initiative 5, but not amazing either. It does feel like we've just sort of strapped for options, so we've just tacked on shield upgrades. Also, advanced proton torpedoes on a Y-Wing is going to be difficult to pull off. Yes, I know Norra Wexley wants to get into range 1 of things, but even at 6 points, it's a bit rough when you don't get it off. So, yeah. Also, proton torpedoes, ion torpedoes. With our double tapping turrets, those things don't line up together. It does honestly feel like these are a bit bloated. I will say, though, Dutch Vander enabling those torpedoes is fantastic. I think in general, I prefer to see him alongside, say, a couple of X-Wings that can fire torpedoes. That feels like a stronger option to me. But again, we've gone for the baseline veteran turret gunner, R4 astromech dorsal turret. Also, expert handling over trick shot. I do like that, and I think definitely if you're going to run these guys as a 3 of, with more stacked builds, named pilots, expert handling to me does feel more powerful than trick shot, because making sure you pick the right actions, making sure you have access to a sort of a quasi-arc dodging thing if that ever comes up is relevant. Positioning is more relevant when your ships are more expensive, so I think in this list, expert handling is correct. I even think in the last list it should be considered over trick shot, but I don't know. That's really is up for debate. Trick shot is very, very powerful, and it's only going to get more powerful when gas clouds come out. So yeah, definitely worth thinking about. Also, proton bombs. I do like proton bombs. And if we're going to stack more points on these guys, I think it makes a lot of sense. Seismic charges over proton bombs. I think there's a case for either. When the rock meta sort of takes over in wave 3 when we have vulture droids, I think seismic charges might just be a little bit too important not to take. But for the time being, proton bombs means you get those big hits against very high value targets. If the Empire is still going to run aces, it's important. But then again, seismic charges are good against aces as well. So 6 of one, half a dozen in the other. I'm not too sure what the right call is there. But yeah, I really like all of these abilities. I really like Norra Wexley. I think given the fact that she's come down in points, she is something to seriously look at Initiative 5. Considering all the toys on her are quite expensive. If we cut away what I consider to be like the flak in this list, take out advanced proton torpedoes, shield upgrade, and proton bombs, she's all the way down to 53 points. And that feels very, very competitive. That almost feels like she could be in some kind of jankyard 4 of build and perform quite well. So that's something to really, really think about. But I like all of these pilots in a vacuum, in isolation. I just don't think it makes a lot of sense to put them together. I think Norra Wexley in a sort of a 4 of build where you have lots of handshaking going on. Dutch Vander alongside things that actively want proton torpedoes like X-Wings and that kind of stuff. Horton Salm, when you perform an attack, you may reroll 1 attack die for each other friendly ship at range 0 to 1. Yeah, I think I'd also like to see him in some kind of 4 of build. If we could get proton torpedoes on him, that would be interesting. But then again, that does push his points up. If we cut away like torpedoes and bombs and all that kind of stuff, again, he's sitting around about the 50-point mark, and maybe him and Norra together could be interesting. Ravenhull, if you're watching, cool idea for a list. I think these builds in isolation could use a bit of work and could probably function better on different lists, but I do like the idea. And at least as a thought experiment, looking at the different amount of Y-Wings we can get on the table, we do have some interesting options. I just feel like the 4 of or 5 of builds probably are going to perform a little bit better if I had to guess. Okay, let's move on to some more builds here. This one is from our YouTube comments by Kiki Dunn. This is Norra and the Bois. Norra Wexley alongside Wedge Antilles and Corran Horn. Corran Horn also came down in points, it's worth pointing out. Norra has expert handling, ion cannon turret, R3 astromech seismic charges and veteran turret gunner. Wedge Antilles has marksmanship, afterburners and the servomoto S-foils. Corran Horn has marksmanship and afterburners. So, Norra in this build is all about brawling. And ion cannon turret and seismic charges mean getting in close, you do have a lot of potential upside. You can help lock down ships. If you can ionize your opponent's ships, that is really good for Wedge and Corran. It would have been nice if we could see something like proton torpedoes in this list, but they've gone up in points and they don't quite fit here. And I think the 9-point bid is far more important. In fact, thinking about the 9-point bid, you could think about changing up some things here. I don't mind R3 astromech on this list. I think it's interesting because of the fact you have ion cannon turret and veteran turret gunner. You can shoot 2 different targets, use 2 different target locks. But I think ultimately with this build, we really want R4 astromech. We want to make sure we have as many blue maneuvers on that dial. We need those actions. Expert handling is sort of pulling double duty in that you're taking away the redness of your actions. You want to free everything up as much as possible. Also, the fact R4 astromech cost 1 less point. So you're getting a clean 10-point bid if you take that over R3. I think, in my mind, that's just the right way to go. And when you do that, you have a bigger bid for Corran and Wedge. Norra herself is also Initiative 5. So yeah, that's just a little bit more important. Also, options, options, options. It's what aces want. Norra is almost an ace in that she has a white barrel roll, and pushing that dial to be better and better and better, I think, is way too important. Now, talking about these other guys, Wedge, marksmanship, afterburners. It's a shame we can't get outmaneuver, but I think marksmanship's a strong move. Especially right now, a lot of Initiative 5s going around, so using marksmanship on Wedge is going to be hopefully nice and brutal. You get a lot of crits across. Also, afterburners on Wedge and on Corran. Yeah, I dig it. And marksmanship on Corran to make sure that we get extra attacks out of that bullseye firing arc. It means the attacks out of your bullseye firing arc are better. I usually wouldn't love something that's synergistic to the point where you don't get value out of the card if nothing happens and Corran doesn't get his extra attacks. But I think marksmanship at only 1 point, that's okay. And I think there's a case to take Predator here. Getting the reroll might just be more important more of the time. Having said that, you're going for max upside, you're going for those criticals. And I think that's the right call to make. I think you've got a nice bit of utility in Norra Wexley. She can brawl, use seismic charges and ion cannon turret to make sure you get just a nice bit of control and a bit of offense against your opponent. And Wedge and Corran, I really hope we see a bit more results out of Corran with this new point adjustment. I like his ability. I think keeping really offensive abilities in the bullseye firing arc is a good move design-wise. It's just about adjusting that power level. And this is the kind of list that I think Corran could do quite well in if they just get the power level right. So yeah, thank you for submitting this list, Kiki. I think it looks really, really solid. Let me know how it goes in the comments. Moving on to another YouTube submitted list by Mr. John Williss. This is a 4-of build with Benthic 2 tubes, Edrio 2 tubes, Jake Farrell and Ivan Verlaine. Also worth pointing out, this was submitted before the points change, and I wanted to make sure I did at least one list this week that happened before the points change. Because apart from everything else, it means we can further workshop these lists, and it helps point out some of the differences and helps highlight the key power level changes moving forward. Benthic 2 tubes has Perceptive Copilot Jyn Erso and the Pivot Wing. Edrio 2 tubes has R3 Astromech Proton Torpedoes and Servomotor S-Foils. Jake Farrell has Duke. Ivan Verlaine has Dorsal Turret. And I think moving forward with the points changes in mind, I look particularly at Proton Torpedoes on Edrio 2 tubes. And I think to myself, at 9 points, Proton Torpedoes was a thing that we could take as a generic value card. At 12 points, I really feel like it needs to be sitting in the right place. I don't think just your generic X-Wing at Edrio's at Initiative 2, that doesn't have the best agency to get target locks at the best of times. I feel like it's still great on like Luke and Wedge. Redline builds are still going to be interested in it if Redline's still doable in some kind of build. I don't really think moving forward the Initiative 2 X-Wing is interested in it. And from that point of view, I just get rid of it. And then your R3 Astromech has less value, so I'd then downgrade it to an R4 Astromech. Again, just more blue on the dial is always a good thing. And when you do that, suddenly we have 18 points to play with. And that's when this build becomes very, very interesting, because I look at everything going on here. I think there's definitely room to play around here, especially Ivan Verlaine. We're talking about the Y-Wing. Let's get on Veteran Turret Gunner. I think there is no reason not to put that there. We can put on Trick Shot. We can put on Expert Handling. In fact, if we get Expert Handling and Veteran Turret Gunner on there, we have a 10-point bid. And at that point, we have a 10-point bid, but to be honest, we have Initiative 2, 2, 3, 4. Who cares about a bid? Let's get some more stuff on here. We can do R4 Astromech on Ivan Verlaine. We could think about Illicits on Edrio or Benthic, for example. Contraband Cybernetics, maybe. Feedback Array, Inertial Dampeners, some really cool stuff there. I wouldn't think too much about torpedoes based on the cost of Proton Torpedoes. What else can we do here? We can also put fire control systems on Benthic 2 tubes. We could think about Attack Scrambler on Benthic 2 tubes. And you can see just how much utility we can get into these builds now if we put the points in the right place. Actually, it was interesting to see the overall cost of your list, John, went down by only 2 points. But the upside from taking out Proton Torpedoes went up significantly because of that point increase. And there is really a lot we can do here. I also love these kind of builds. The 4 Rebel builds that have nice handshaking abilities. I already think the 2 Tubes brothers are interesting. If you guys saw the demo video way back that Team Covenant did with Alex Davey, he actually took them alongside another Y-Wing. I can't remember exactly what he did. But the 2 Tubes seem to perform quite well. At Initiative 2, they're very interesting blockers. With the points reduction, we can look at some serious utility options for them. And flying alongside Aces and other support ships, maybe not Evan Rill, maybe that's not quite correct, maybe not Jake Farrell, but there are definitely a lot of really cool options on the Rebellion right now. And I think that is the key thing I want you guys to get out of this video. We're just still talking about these points changes, and there's going to be a lot of experimentation on the Rebellion. They were sitting firmly in 3rd place in the meta. There's now 5 factions, and I think it would be a shame if they were just sort of dead last. In fact, right now, I'm looking at things like the First Order and Resistance and the Rebellion and wondering how these guys are going to prevail. I'd really love to see the Rebellion do better. I'd love to see them take some more tournaments. The First Order and Resistance are very, very interesting. They did have some points changes, and I'm not really sure. We're in the wild, wild west right now. Some people have described this as the X-Wing 3.0. I think that's a pretty fair assessment based on what's going on with the meta. Righto guys, next week we have another Scum video. There's a lot to talk about with the Scum faction because basically all their super oppressive effects have been increased in points. I still think things like the Fire Spray, even the Hawk is still a viable option in some builds, but it's not just the good stuff list. Moving forward, I think we're going to have to look at some more synergy on the Scum faction. So I'm super excited to talk about that in my new house. In the meantime, guys, don't forget to like and subscribe. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter and Reddit. Please consider supporting the Patreon. Thank you so much to all of my existing patrons. Really appreciate all that you do. We just hit our first patron goal over the past couple of weeks. So after I'm moved out into my new office, we're going to have a look at doing a new weekly X-Wing segment on the channel. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, guys, I'll catch you later.